Study 1. All right, buckle up, buttercups, because we're about to dive into the wacky world of narcissism, made simple and sprinkled with a bit of, wait, are they for real? Humor. So, picture this. You know those folks who strut around like they own the place, constantly talking about their amazingness? Well, scientists have been scratching their heads and going, is all that confidence actually real? Turns out, for people who are really into themselves, we're talking full-on narcissistic tendencies here, the gap between how awesome they think they are and how awesome they actually are might be wider than the Grand Canyon. They might act like they're the bee's knees, the cat's pajamas, the whole enchilada of fabulousness. But get this. Deep down, they're like a leaky faucet constantly needing a drip of admiration to feel good. They can't even convince themselves how brilliant they are. It's like they're wearing a superhero costume but secretly hoping someone will shout, "Look, a superhero!" Now, it's not just about thinking they look better in the mirror than everyone else, though they probably do think that. Research is showing this perception-reality gap goes way beyond just looks and achievements. Narcissism exists on a sliding scale. On one end, you've got a healthy dose of, yeah, I'm pretty good at this, which is normal. But on the far end, it's a whole personality thing that affects a small chunk of the population. And guess what? The more "look at me" someone is, the bigger this gap tends to be. These high-level narcissists, they're the ones who get all huffy if you don't roll out the red carpet for them. It's like they expect a personal parade wherever they go. The funny and slightly sad thing is, by acting like entitled divas, they actually mess up the image they're trying so hard to create. It's like trying to build a sand castle during high tide, and boy, do they get their feathers ruffled. By criticism, you even think about suggesting they're not perfect, and bam, anger explosion. It's their way of protecting this super fragile ego they've built. A study even found they get more paranoid than the average Joe, thinking people are out to get them, even when there's zero proof. Talk about seeing shadows. On top of that, these folks have a serious case of FOMO, fear of missing out, on steroids. If you don't text back immediately, they're convinced you're deliberately excluding them and plotting their social demise. Their brains seem to twist normal social hiccups into personal attacks. It's like they're walking around with a permanent, "everyone's against me" filter on. So how does this whole mess play out? Well, narcissism and feeling left out seem to egg each other on. There are different flavors of narcissism, by the way. You've got the grand type. These are your loud, proud, look at my biceps kind of narcissists. Then you've got the vulnerable type. They're more like the sensitive souls who are super worried about what everyone thinks of them. But both types share this core belief that they deserve special treatment and a tendency to be a bit, well, difficult. The researchers in the U.S. decided to focus on the grand kind, specifically looking at two sides of their coin. Narcissistic admiration, think charming and manipulative, and narcissistic rivalry, think putting others down and being aggressive. They looked at a ton of data and found that people who scored high on narcissism reported feeling excluded way more often. And guess what? When they looked at how others reacted to these folks, especially the rivalry types, it turned out people tended to actually exclude them, even if they didn't know the person was particularly narcissistic. It's like their behavior repels people. Who would have thought? The researchers basically concluded that being narcissistic can lead to social isolation, and being socially isolated can actually make someone even more narcissistic over time. It's a vicious cycle of, "I'm amazing. Why is everyone ignoring me?" leading to more, "I'll show them how amazing I am by being a jerk." This whole perception-reality disconnect also ties into some other interesting stuff. For example, a study found that people high in narcissism are more likely to believe in conspiracy theories, and this is often fueled by their paranoia. Makes sense, right? If you already think everyone's out to get you, a secret cabal controlling the world probably sounds pretty plausible. And this is a bit scary because conspiracy theories can lead to some seriously harmful stuff. Interestingly, narcissistic traits also seem to be a bit more common in politicians. Maybe that need for constant admiration and a belief in their own. Superiority comes with the territory, and when their power or special treatment is challenged, conspiracy theories might sound pretty appealing to them too. So, what's the takeaway from all this? Well, for those trying to help people with high levels of narcissism, it's not just about fixing their relationships. You also have to tackle how they see the world. Narcissistic personality disorder is serious and can even increase the risk of suicide. Traditional therapy often hits a wall because these folks are super resistant to letting go of their perfect self-image. But some new approaches are trying to target these distorted ways of thinking. Therapists might try to help them understand why they get so defensive or why they feel so excluded, even when it's not really happening. The goal is to help them see their own reactions more clearly and develop some skills to handle those feelings in a healthier way. Ultimately, it's about bridging that giant gap between the amazing person they think they are and the actual way they're coming across to the rest of us. If they can get a little more self-awareness, it could make life a whole lot less dramatic. For them and for everyone around them who's tired of the constant self-promotion and occasional hissy fits. And who knows, maybe they'll even realize that true awesomeness doesn't need a spotlight, it just is. Study 2. All right, gather round lovebirds and lonely hearts. Ever wonder why some folks seem to have a mile-long list of must-haves in a partner, while others are just happy if they don't snore too loudly? Well, science has been poking around in the dating pool, and the results are surprisingly unimpressive when it comes to predicting your pickiness. A brand-spanking new study just dropped in the archives of sexual behavior. Ooh la la, sounds spicy. And it turns out that things like your age, how much moolah you rake in, your fancy diplomas, or even how many times your heart's been stomped on in the past don't really tell us much about what you're looking for in the one. Or, the maybe. Now, there was one tiny little thing that mattered a smidge more. How hot stuff you thought you were. Basically, if you were strutting around thinking you're God's gift to dating, you probably had slightly higher standards. But even then, it was a pretty weak predictor. So, all those times you thought the super picky person was just rich or young. Nope, could just be they have a really high opinion of themselves. We already knew that generally people dig kindness, brains, and a decent face. No surprises there. And we tend to run screaming from arrogance and hostility. Also, duh. But this study went a step further and asked people what they actively wanted to avoid. Think of it as the deal-breaker list. The brainy folks behind this research were all, let's see if the people who think they're a catch have even crazier expectations. Their evolutionary theory hunch was that if you think you're a prize, you'll demand more in return, both the good stuff and the hell-no stuff. One of the lead scientists, Zofia Scheibach, pointed out that everyone kind of assumes that certain objective things like being young, educated, or wealthy make you a more desirable mate and therefore give you the right to be super picky. But, she said, previous studies haven't really backed that up. She figured maybe earlier research just didn't have enough different kinds of people in their samples. So they went big, surveying a whole bunch of Czech adults, because why not Czechia? They grilled 2,280 people aged 18 to 50 about their income, education, dating history, how bangin' they thought they were, and their dream and nightmare partner traits. They asked them to rate how much they valued things like warmth, hotness, and smarts, and what they absolutely wanted to avoid, like being with someone abusive, depressed, or, heaven forbid, unclean. The researchers also looked at people's mating strategies, how many partners they'd had if they were currently shackled, and if they had little humans running around. They used all this info to see if it predicted their romantic wish lists, and if men and women had different lists. Lo and behold, some stereotypes held up. Women were generally pickier across the board. They really valued warmth, social status. Think Can they take me to a fancy dinner? And dominance. Think, can they kill a spider without screaming? Men, bless their simple hearts, mostly just cared about physical attractiveness. When it came to the no-go list, women were much more likely to ditch someone who was lazy, mean, arrogant, clingy, stage 5 clinger alert, abusive, or down in the dumps. Across both sexes, warmth was the top yes, and social status was the meh. Hostility and abusiveness were the biggest get out of here, while clinginess was surprisingly low on the ick scale. Maybe some people like a little human barnacle? Who are we to judge? But here's the kicker. None of these factors really explained much about people's preferences. How desirable you thought you were only explained about 1 to 2% of the differences in what people wanted. And even when they threw in everything, age, money, education, the whole shebang, it still only explained a measly 3 to 5% of why people like what they like. It's like trying to predict the weather by looking at your socks. C. Sajbach summed it up nicely. What we find attractive and what we expect in a partner is just really subjective and weirdly difficult to pin down with simple facts. She even spun it as good news, saying that your age or bank account doesn't necessarily doom you to low standards or give you a free pass to be ridiculously demanding. Interestingly, the study did find that they could predict the good traits people wanted a bit better than the bad traits they avoided. And women's own characteristics seemed to influence their preferences more than men's. For example, ladies who thought they were hot stuff also wanted a hot, passionate, and dominant dude. Shocking, right? Also, more educated and richer women had higher standards for intelligence and emotional stability. You go, girls! They even checked if preferences changed as people got older or smarter. These changes were there, but pretty tiny. Age barely mattered. Education had a slightly bigger effect, especially for women, who got less and less tolerant of nasty, ugly, and mopey partners as their education went up. Self-perceived hotness also had some weird effects, especially for women, who got a much bigger hankering for dominant and stable guys the more they thought they were all that, and a bag of chips. Relationship history also played a tiny role. People with more past conquests wanted more passion and less depression in a partner. But the longer people were in a relationship, the more they seemed to chill out on things like attractiveness and dominance. And moms with more kids, they lowered their expectations for attractiveness and brains. Maybe they were just tired. But the big takeaway? Most of why we want what we want in a partner remains a mystery. Even with a big, diverse group of people, simple facts about them didn't really explain their dating wish lists. C. Sajbach wisely pointed out, just because you don't have all the perfect traits that stereotypes say you should have doesn't mean you're doomed in the dating world. People have all sorts of weird and wonderful reasons for liking who they like, and relationships are way more complicated than just ticking off a few boxes. Of course, the study had a few quirks. It was only in Czechia and mostly looked at straight folks. Also, they only used one simple question to gauge how desirable people thought they were, which might not be the most accurate measure. The researchers also didn't ask about short-term flings versus long-term soulmates, which could definitely change what people prioritize. But they did this on purpose to avoid putting people into artificial categories. The bottom line? Dating is weird. What we think we want and what we actually go for can be two very different things. And all those rules about who should want whom based on age, money, or education. Turns out they're mostly just hot air. So, go forth and date whomever your quirky little heart desires. Just maybe try not to be too arrogant about it. You know, for science. Study 3. All right, buckle up your brain buckets, folks, because scientists have been peeking inside the noggins of people with strong my way or the highway attitudes, whether they lean politically right or left. And guess what? They found some interesting plumbing differences. A new study in the journal Neuroscience, fancy, right, used brain scanners to snoop around the skulls of young adults. What they discovered is that folks who scored high on right-wing authoritarianism, think those who really like tradition and strong leaders, had a bit less gray matter in a part of their brain called the dorsomedial prefrontal cortex. Now, this fancy-pants region is like the brain's social butterfly, helping you understand what other people are thinking. Less of it might mean you're a bit less walk a mile in their shoes, and more just follow the rules. Meanwhile, the lefty version of my way or the highway, what they're calling left-wing authoritarianism, think those super eager to tear down hierarchies and censor anything they disagree with, showed something different. These individuals had a thinner outer layer, cortical thickness, in the right anterior insula. This brainy bit is like your inner Mr. Rogers, all about empathy and keeping your emotions in check. A thinner one might mean less peace and love, and more smash the system. Now, why did these brainy boffins go digging in the first place? Well, they wanted to see if the psychological traits we already associate with authoritarianism, like being impulsive, stubborn as a mule, and easily freaked out by anything that seems like a threat, actually show up in the brain's hardware. They were especially curious about the left-wing flavor of authoritarianism because, let's be honest, most of the research has been focused on the right side of the aisle. But as the scientists pointed out, bossy, anti-democracy attitudes can pop up anywhere on the political spectrum. It's like bad karaoke. It knows no political boundaries. One of the lead brain snoopers, Jesus Adrian Ventura, said that while we're learning more about the mindset of authoritarians, we haven't really seen much about what's going on under the hood, especially for the left-leaning ones. So they decided to get their MRI machines whirring and see what they could find. They rounded up 100 young Spaniards, mostly university students, so probably used to people telling them what to do, and made them fill out a bunch of questionnaires. These weren't your average "who do you vote for" surveys. They dug into authoritarian beliefs on both sides, how impulsive and anxious they were, and how well they handled their feelings. Importantly, they used some newfangled questionnaires that actually try to measure left-wing authoritarianism, looking at things like how much people agreed with aggressive anti-establishment ideas and shutting down opinions they didn't like. Then came the fun part, the brain scans. Everyone hopped into the MRI machine for a high-resolution peek at their gray matter volume, the dense stuff packed with brain cells, and their cortical thickness, the depth of the brain's outer wrinkly layer. The scientists then crunched the numbers to see if any of these brain features were linked to authoritarian beliefs. Behavior-wise, the study backed up what we already knew. Authoritarians, no matter their political stripes, tend to be impulsive when their emotions are running high. Both lefties and righties scored high on negative urgency, which is basically acting without thinking when you're upset. However, the lefty authoritarians, especially those who were all about aggressively sticking it to the man, also tended to be more anxious in general. Apparently, wanting to tear down the system can be a bit stressful. Now for the juicy brain, bits. As mentioned earlier, right-wing authoritarians had less gray matter in that social reasoning part of the brain. The scientists think this might mean they have a harder time seeing things from other people's viewpoints, or are just less flexible in their thinking. It's like their brain's understanding others muscle is a little underdeveloped. On the other side, the left-wing authoritarians who were really into aggressive anti-hierarchy stuff had a thinner right anterior insula. This brain region, as we said, is linked to feeling empathy and keeping your emotions in check. So, less thickness there might mean less, let's all hold hands and sing Kumbaya, and more off with their heads, metaphorically speaking, hopefully. The scientists were actually pretty surprised by how clear these brain differences were. Getting significant results in MRI studies can be tricky, so finding these medium to large effects was a big deal. It definitely makes them want to dig deeper. To double-check their findings, they also looked at how these brain differences lined up with other related political views. Less gray matter in the social reasoning area also seemed to go hand in hand with social dominance orientation, the belief that some groups are just naturally better than others, which is often a right-wing thing. And the thinner empathy emotion control area was linked to strong radical feminist views, which often share that anti-authority vibe with left-wing authoritarianism. It's like the brain is picking sides. Of course, this study isn't the final word. On authoritarian brains, the sample was mostly young, educated Spaniards, so we can't say for sure if these findings apply to older folks or people from different cultures and political backgrounds. As the researchers themselves pointed out, what looks like authoritarianism can vary a lot depending on where you are and what's going on. Also, because it was just a snapshot in time, this study can't tell us if these brain differences cause authoritarian attitudes or if having those attitudes changes the brain over time. It's a classic chicken or the egg scenario. The scientists stressed that your brain isn't the only thing calling the shots when it comes to your political beliefs. These brain differences probably reflect long-term patterns of thinking and feeling that get mixed in with social and cultural influences. For example, if you're naturally anxious or tend to fly off the handle when stressed, you might be more drawn to ideologies that offer simple answers and strong leadership when the world feels scary. Looking ahead, the researchers want to see how these brain regions actually work when people are making political decisions.